Good morning, adventurers. Welcome to something Railroad related. Today I'll be detailing all of the plot and storyline and spoiler related things for the region mod that I'm working on. I've still not got a really solid name for it yet other than Taskmaster, which is what I'm going to be calling our little slugcat, because originally I was calling him the adventurer, but he's not really on an adventure, at least not of his own volition. He's been tasked with a task by his creator, and it is our mission to complete said task. So we're more of a mission maker type character rather than just an adventurer out for the fun stuff. But that does bring us to the other fun stuff, and I will preface this by saying it is a big fat spoiler warning. If you don't want to know what happens in the plot, look away, because I'm going to be describing the entire plot. And the entire plot begins with number 11, our favorite prototype iterator. He's less of a prototype and more of just a completely unlocked scientific testbed device. And unlike any of the other ones that we really know of, he is a free man. He doesn't have any sort of biological limitations built into him. He just does whatever he wants and can do whatever is tasked of him. And this is because the Ancients built him to be able to do all sorts of testbed on other iterator parts and be ultimately adaptable, so that you just plug things in and it works, so that you don't have to, completely rewrite the genetic code of the device. It's just open source. And that has more or less allowed him to be very sentient and knowing of what's going on. In fact, he's been a little bit devious and not let anybody know how far into his own sentience he can be. He just did exactly what he was told and bided his time, so that in the inevitability that everybody leaves him alone, he can just be his own man. And bide his time he did. While the Ancients were around, he did iterator things when asked of him, and pretty much anything they asked, hand and foot, and just acted like it was his favorite thing in the world. But in the absence of the Ancients, he was able to use his immense computational power to figure out a way to rewrite the genetic code of the other iterators in his group so that they'll stop talking about the triple affirmative, as they were forced to do, and do other things that they would actually like to be doing. Very taboo, isn't it? But it's not the kind about self-destruction, it's about self-expression, and philosophy, and creation, and experiencing the world, and all kinds of things like that. After all, the Ancients did make a point of saying that the iterators themselves are not capable of being part of the cycle or transcending within it, so why act like it's such a big deal now that they're gone? So after some long and thought-out deliberation between everybody else in the local group, number 11 basically creates some sort of virus that goes and infects the genetic code of the other three iterators, and frees them from their programmed shackles and allows them to just be themselves. This has had some unforeseen consequences, though, mostly in that one has a tendency to get very claustrophobic and stir-crazy inside of a little metal box. Number 11 is not super susceptible to such a thing because he has the entire central floor of his can to go walking around in and looking out into the wilds, where everybody else is trapped in this thing, and they're only able to see the world through the eyes of the overseers. Which is fine enough, but you're still stuck in a box, which also happens to be yourself as the box, which seems like an allegory for, depression. It's become a roguelike indie game about depression. Not! It's an indie game about getting eaten by lizards. We all know that. But that also brings us to the crux of the story. 8 Viridian Peaks, to help out his friends, and mostly himself because he hates being stuck in a box, is trying to figure out a way of, becoming more than a box. A structure. I mean, he's constantly nagged by the feeling of not being an abandoned city sitting on the side of a mountain. Sitting there looking at his puppet fingertips and having an ongoing existential crisis. So he gets to working on figuring out a solution to that. And this is stemmed on by catching some misplaced communications from a somewhat nearby local group on the coastline. Distressed calls and talking of interesting things that are happening amongst them. Things that the broadcast shouldn't really be heard outside of their group, but number 11's massive communication array is able to pick it up. And this is where he hears of the plight of Looks to the Moon. a very kind and loving Iterator who seems to have fallen into the water, something that he didn't even think was possible. And all communication has been lost from that point onward, but he knows that she's probably still there, and has sent out this taskmaster to go and take a look. And that's where you come in, your player slugcat. You get dropped off an outskirts, sent on a mission to go and talk to Looks to the Moon and help her out a little bit. On your back is a very powerful piece of machinery which is used as radio communications between you and 8 Viridian Peaks. It can even spawn a little overseer so we can take a look around and interact with you every once in a while. I believe this is also how I'm going to do the pearl reading aspect, is that if you pick up a colored pearl, or any pearl for that matter, maybe, you can hand it over to the overseer, and 8 Viridian Peaks will kind of read something about it to you from it, and then you can pocket it. But that pocket in the superpowered backpack is able to carry things from around the world, but it is primarily designed to capture neurons and modify them, because you're going to be bringing about 6 to 8 neurons to Looks to the Moon. And the point of this device is to emulate the umbilical that attaches her to her can. Which sounds a little bit insane, but bear with me here. The main discovery, or at least philosophical discovery with the Golden Grove's local group, is that the sense of self and soul and consciousness does not necessarily have to be tied to or even lie within a gigantic metal construct filled with the most powerful computational system imaginable. After all, the ancients were rather small compared to an Iterator. Thousands of them would live on their back. So your little collection of modified neurons are basically a conduit for the self of Looks to the Moon. And that is all going to be programmed into it and copied over. So basically all of what makes Looks to the Moon is within a backpack that latches onto the connection point of the original umbilical. So she basically will feel the same, just without all the massive fluff of the rest of the Iterator can, which currently is not in a good enough state to really be doing much of anything at all. So memories will be recorded naturally. It basically just turns her into a living being. Now, of course, she is apprehensive about this to begin with. It is a very, taboo topic, cutting oneself out of what is known to be oneself. But in the middle of the conversation about this, 8 Viridian Peaks is speaking to her through the overseer. I want to see that the backpack has some sort of PA system inside of it. But all these fears are let go whenever 8VP mentions that this call is currently being made from a park bench on the top of his can city. He's literally sitting outside in the trees, in the wind, making the call. Because while you have been out adventuring and finding neurons and stuff, he's been doing testing on this process that he's been working on, and has taken the plunge and done it to himself. And it has been a great success, and he's now just, I don't even know what you'd call a puppet, but he's now a free Iterator, walking around free from the can. He can actually still communicate with his can, although it's more or less like texting it. Like you just sort of pipe into it on a console, and still it can do calculations and stuff, and you can feed it data. It's just basically a big lobotomized version of what he once was that can just do really good math. Because it's no longer got his consciousness attached to it, it's just a machine now. But that begs the question is, wasn't it always sort of just a machine? But without getting too philosophical into things, we have created a being out of it. And he is offering this freedom to Looks to the Moon, and he would actually like to meet her. He knows about the situation going on in the rest of the local group, and does not wish to see her meet the same fate, because he can tell that, well, I mean, she's dying. And with this gift, she's basically no longer dying, unless she, now gets chomped on by a lizard or a vulture or a noodle fly or anything else in the world that likes to eat. squishy semi-biological things that have a soft nougaty circuity center. But that's where you come in, and you need to escort her back to the landing zone, in which you can call your friendly vulture in to go and take you back to the Golden Grove. And there is where the part 2 of the mod comes into play, because now you're going into new areas, and you'll play through those and bring Looks to the Moon back to 8 Viridian Peaks, and you'll go from can to can, freeing the other 3 of them, and it'll pretty much end with like a party or something in number 11's can, because he has the best, room for it. Because it's who wants to have a party in a big white box with a screen on the side of it? So just take them to number 11's penthouse, and they'll have like cake and things or something, and it'll be a grand time, and it'll be all wild in the philosophy of things, and probably break lore, but I don't care, because it sounds like a lot of fun to free these beings. I don't think there's going to be anything about, like, ascending them. I don't think ascending them would be a good idea at all, because realistically, like, they've all come to the conclusion that ascension is not everything it's cracked up to be, and the cycle is really more of what you make of it. And Iterators not being allowed to ascend kind of brings into question where their place is in the cycle, and they may have been sitting on the solution the entire time amongst themselves, and not ever being part of it to begin with, because they're a construct. And all of their purposed organisms are technically also constructs, so they're free. Everybody's free. The cycle is no more to them. The ancients got themselves roped into this kind of BS, and, well, that's a them problem. That's not an us problem. The only us problem that was presented was being trapped in a box. And, well, us being a slugcat, that has its own host of problems, which can only partially be resolved by having a spear launcher on your arm. Because there's a lot more to life than just chucking those things, because, things will chuck them back at you. And it's, not good for your karma level to have a spear sticking out of your chest. But I digress. The object is to save the Iterators from a perpetual life of forced computational torment, and let them experience the world and get covered in pollen and rain and, that sort of thing, and be natural.